Serhiy Hrabsky, military analyst, is joining our broadcast. Serhiy, hello, we're glad to see you.
Yes, greetings.
Let's talk. Well, Alaska is certainly an interesting and trending topic. It's on everyone's lips right now. Still, we can't ignore it either. But I want to talk about what is actually happening on the front right now, because I think that's much more important. So let's talk about the realities on the ground, as some people say. So please tell me, does what is happening now on the front line somehow correlate with possible hypotheses about future negotiations, for example, that there could be a ceasefire and that this is one of Trump's conditions? Or should we rule this out completely? Is it all impossible? What's your assessment?
It's all impossible. You see, here's the thing. If it were correlated, it would be reflected in certain actions and I would say movements by the diplomatic services of Russia and the United States. Why am I drawing attention to this? Because generally speaking, according to all the norms and rules of diplomatic protocol, such meetings are final meetings, meetings that essentially sum up the results of many days, weeks, or possibly even months of work preparing some document. But here everything is turned upside down. In other words, a meeting is being held that is not defined by anything or anyone. That is precisely why we are seeing such a staggering range of rumors, assumptions, speculations, and so on and so forth, none of which actually have any real substance behind them. Therefore, relating this to the current military actions makes no sense at all. Moreover, the president of Ukraine was, in my opinion, very clear in his statement that as of today, I believe he said this yesterday or the day before, the Russian Federation has no plans whatsoever to reduce the intensity of hostilities. And we continue to see ongoing Russian strikes on our facilities, attempts to advance, and so on and so forth. No, absolutely not. It in no way correlates with what is supposed to happen today in Anchorage, apparently without any consequences.
Sergei, Reuters reports that the Russian Federation may be preparing to test a new cruise missile with a nuclear warhead, that is, with a nuclear payload. All of this is happening despite the planned meeting. Please explain, first of all, what these tests are, what is known about them, and also assess how likely it is that such things can actually happen against the backdrop of so-called attempts to bring negotiations toward peace.
You know, such statements actually rule out the possibility of any negotiations because, generally speaking, in diplomacy, starting talks with tough ultimatums is essentially signing their death sentence even before they begin. Absolutely, with no exceptions whatsoever. That's precisely why such definitive statements were made once again, which only profoundly reinforces my unwavering belief in particular that there are absolutely no agreements currently being discussed, and we most certainly won't see any tangible results from this particular meeting. As for this missile itself, it's important to understand that what is being tested is the missile carrier, which is capable of carrying nuclear weapons. Such tests are conducted quite regularly, quite often, and honestly, I wouldn't pay much attention to it either. But even based on the undeniable fact that not a single official representative of any of the major nuclear club countries is currently talking about this particular and highly sensitive issue, well, even if we can more or less exclude China from this list, if this event posed even a potential threat, we would have heard an immediate reaction from the United Kingdom, France, or the United States. There, the rules of the game are a bit different. We don't participate in them. It's a somewhat different sphere of activity, so to speak, a parallel universe. So for us, this missile poses absolutely no threat whatsoever. I want to emphasize once again what you should pay attention to first and foremost. The official statements from representatives of the nuclear club countries. No such definitive statements have been officially made, so I can confidently say with a very high degree of certainty that this is more of a psychological tactic rather than any real substantive tests or an actual genuine attempt to fundamentally change the existing status quo in light of this important meeting.
And what can you say about the Reshnik, which the Belarusians are already threatening with during their exercises? Supposedly they will be testing it at the beginning of September. Is that also a bluff?
Well, you know, really, it's quite sufficient to simply examine the detailed and comprehensive map of the extensive training grounds where these significant and highly anticipated military exercises are scheduled to be meticulously held. And honestly, after a thorough and careful review, I definitively do not observe or locate the specific and well-known area of Kapustiny Yar anywhere on that particular map. You understand yourself, in order to launch such a missile, certain preparations are required. This missile is essentially stationary, so I also have serious doubts that such tests will actually be conducted. That's the first thing. But even if they do try to conduct some kind of test, let me repeat once again, we're talking exclusively about testing the carrier. And since they've made this statement, again, we haven't seen any results so far. And honestly, I don't recall there being any test site in Belarus from which such a launch could be carried out. But it would be done toward the Russian Federation, somewhere in the direction of the White Sea, or to other authorized test sites, if it even happens at all. But again, let me repeat, as of today, this does not pose any threat to us.
Sergei, could you please tell us about the loss of the Su-30SM? As I understand it, this is the very fighter jet that the Russians lost near Snake Island while it was carrying out combat missions. Why is there such confidence? Because Russian propagandists are writing about it, including Fighter Bomber. They have this Z Telegram channel. He wished them eternal flight and all that sort of thing. What do you think about such Russian losses in general? Could they become more frequent? And what do you think could have caused it? After all, it's interesting that Kirill Budanov was recently on Snake Island, it seems. Quite a coincidence here.
Well, as for what exactly could have happened, I probably can't say, because there are so many possibilities, ranging from a Bandera seagull flying into the engine intake to the pilots trying to light a cigarette in the cockpit and failing. So anything is possible. Of course, I'm joking. It's basically impossible to smoke in a combat aircraft. But still, this is all, well, really just speculation and, for now, fanciful assumptions. But here's what's most important for us. And my colleague was right in saying that the Russian Federation cannot produce such aircraft on an industrial scale that would meet the needs of this war. And for the Russians, the loss of each such aircraft, just like any combat aircraft, is a very significant loss. The Russian Federation is capable of expanding the ground component of its army, increasing it as planned for this year by 150,000. But the Russian army has proven to be phenomenally incapable of sufficiently expanding its air force, or as they call it, its aerospace component. And this is very important for us, because I have always insisted, I insist now, and I will continue to insist, that without control of the airspace, without achieving air superiority, it is pointless, I'd even say criminal, for Ukraine to talk about any possible offensive actions. It's impossible. Therefore, given that the Russians cannot increase their capabilities, while we have a fairly significant potential, we must and will continue to build up our strength and carry out such strikes, or do everything possible to make sure these planes, well, don't land, that the number of takeoffs does not equal the number of landings.
Sergei, how would you comment on the strikes, including those on the oil refineries? The fourth oil refinery was damaged within a week by Ukrainian drones. We understand that oil refineries are directly the kind of Russian production that supports the front lines of the occupying forces with gasoline, diesel, and so on. Also, what's interesting is that the defense forces attacked a seaport in Russia through which Shaheds were supplied from Iran. This happened on August 14th. We're talking about the port of Olya in Russia's Astrakhan region. Please tell us about the strikes that have taken place in recent days. What do you think? Which of the targets caught your attention? What surprised you and what didn't?
I was both surprised and impressed, to put it briefly, not just by the strike on the port of Olya, but by the direct hit on the ship Olya 4, if I'm not mistaken. That's what it's called, but that's what happened. Why is this important? Because it was a precision strike from a very long distance. So I was genuinely surprised that a drone is actually capable of delivering such highly precise strikes in real time. It's simply astonishing, and it's something to admire. As for other Russian military and quasi-military infrastructure targets, here's what we're dealing with. Striking oil refineries serves not only the purely utilitarian military goal of destroying fuel supplies or preventing the production of fuel for army needs. Let's not forget that the fundamental foundation of the Russian Federation's substantial military budget is primarily based upon the extensive sale of crude oil and various petroleum products. And yes, such strikes on these kinds of facilities lead to Russia starting to miss its export deliveries. Although for now it's not on a large scale, they're trying to maintain the balance. Russia is already losing and losing very significant budget revenues from the domestic circulation of petroleum products. But let's not forget, aside from the military sphere, there's also the civilian sector. We are now entering the harvest season, and in this way, we are striking not only at the areas that directly support the war, but also at those that have an indirect impact on the harvest, or rather on the war, namely the harvesting and preparation of, well, food products themselves. Plus, this affects prices. This causes, well, I understand that hopes for this are slim, but nevertheless, a kind of unrest in people's minds, as they say, begins to appear, and Russians start to feel the war themselves. And also, what we now take for granted, as you know, is that we continue to methodically and consistently strike other targets, which leads to the suspension of air traffic deep inside Russia, in Kaluga, Saratov, Nizhny Novgorod, and so on and so forth. That's why it's very important for us to continue and intensify such strikes. I am very pleased that we are also using jet drones in the war against Russia, the very ones the Russian Federation used to threaten us with. We are also striking enemy targets with jet drones and achieving significant successes.
Serhiy, we have to discuss the topic of Pokrovsk with you. Why? Because, well, we still want to stay grounded in reality. On the one hand, it was said that the 3rd Assault Brigade was sent there to contain this breakthrough at the front. It's unclear how or in what numbers the Russian group is present there, right? Now, the Washington Post is reporting that the Ukrainian army is actually at risk of being encircled in Pokrovsk. Let me remind our audience that before the full-scale invasion, about 400,000 people lived there. But in fact, the Russians did everything so that 98% of the residents simply left the city. So, could you please tell us what is actually happening there?
Well, you really surprised me, because just before our conversation, I was talking to the guys who are stationed at the most dangerous point on the approaches to Pokrovsk, that is on the southwest side. And, a certain phenomenon occurred here that often happens. When our foreign friends call and ask, is everything really bad? Is it all terrible? We say, no, actually, we're living, we're enjoying life. And roughly the same shift in the spectrum of emotions can be observed here as well. That is, the guys say, well, yes, there's work to do. We understand what we're dealing with and who we're up against. But honestly, panic or any kind of defeatism is a long way off. As for the actions we are observing, I am always very careful with military terminology, and I insist that there has been no breakthrough of the front. If a breakthrough of the front had occurred, we would see columns of Russian equipment moving across the Ukrainian steppes, bypassing Pokrovsk, and yes, actually encircling it. And if you look closely at all the sources available in the public domain, you will see that, in general, the enemy has indeed advanced significantly with its forward infantry groups without the support of equipment. I emphasize that these two aspects are extremely important. Infantry without equipment support simply cannot advance at the pace prescribed in operational manuals for conducting combat operations. And in fact, the fighting is still ongoing. Therefore, to say that Pokrovsk will be encircled tomorrow or the day after can only be said by either an ignoramus or a complete idiot. The fighting continues. The fighting continues. Our troops are pushing the enemy back and conducting clearing operations. Yes, there are locations that we will probably be hearing about very often in the coming days, such as the settlement of Nikanorovka, where the enemy has managed to gain a foothold, and it is quite difficult to dislodge them from there. But to say that Pokrovsk or Dobropoli is under threat of encirclement is, to put it mildly, not true. The enemy,
to sum up,
slipped through, but I repeat once again, this is not a breakthrough of the front. There has been no breakthrough of the front. And this is important to remember, especially given the state of information pressure that, as they say, is being unleashed on us with the help of so-called useful idiots.
Well, let's hope that the Washington Post just wanted to get a flashy headline and use this kind of tactic to achieve it. Well, that's on their conscience. And I'd like to ask you one last question. Let's discuss this call between Kim Jong-il and Putin. In what context? Afterwards, there was information from Kirill Budanov that North Korea could indeed send another 6,000 soldiers and hundreds of pieces of equipment to Russia. Trump overshadowed the entire news space with his talks with Putin. But in reality, we understand that this kind of proxy, military force in the form of North Korea could be dangerous for us when it comes to Russia. Please tell us, do you believe that North Korean troops will still be sent to Ukraine? And how much equipment could they transfer to Putin's army?
Let's clarify. No, I don't believe that North Korean troops will be sent to Ukraine or to the combat zone. North Korean military personnel, perhaps, with their equipment might be sent. Why is it important to understand this? Because in order for North Korean troops to be deployed to the combat zone, a separate sector of the front would need to be allocated for them. They would have to operate under their own leadership, command, operate within their own system of management and logistics. This is critically important to understand because we are not seeing this. What we are seeing is the presence of North Korean military personnel within the combat formations of Russian troops. Could they transfer 6,000 soldiers? You see, Budanov doesn't say troops or soldiers. Yes, absolutely. The equipment? Yes, absolutely. Why is this important? But again, as you understand, for us, 6,000 is, well, about a week's worth of Russian, cannon fodder. So they might last us for a week. But what is critically important is that North Korean servicemen who, as they say, get battle tested in combat against Ukrainian forces, receive what they are being sent for, priceless combat experience. Plus, the reason I take the arrival of equipment very seriously is that they are learning to use their own equipment. And as you can imagine, transferring North Korean servicemen or military units along with their own equipment is very expensive, inefficient, and frankly, pointless. But if we talk about the fact that after learning on the battlefield against Ukrainian forces, how to operate their own equipment, this equipment will be returned, or those servicemen who gain combat experience will come back and train their fellow soldiers, then you can imagine how significant a threat this poses to South Korean forces, who, just like the North Korean forces, have not fought in the last 70 years. That is precisely why this threat must be taken extremely seriously, but it does not concern only Ukraine. For Ukraine, this is just another batch of cannon fodder that needs to be eliminated. South Korea should be on high alert, or at the very least, reconsider its approach to cooperation with Ukraine in order to neutralize such a threat. What I mean is that the strikes by good drones should extend to Transbaikalia and the Far East.
Understood. Thank you very much. Serhiy Hrabsky, military analyst, was on the air with Ukraine today. All the best to you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.